So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the pre-production and planning that went into making my new documentary Hot Shop. If you want to watch the full project, I'll be leaving a link in the bio of this video. So the first key thing to starting any documentary is finding your story and your subject. So I knew I wanted to create a short documentary based around a single person and their craft, and specifically a craft that is visually appealing on camera. So I kind of fell into a YouTube rabbit hole watching all these different glass blowing videos, and I thought this would be a really cool craft to explore. So I knew the next step would be to try and find a local glass blower for this project. And from working on a couple short documentaries in the past, I knew these projects end up working out a lot better if you base them on someone you know personally or like at least referred to by a friend. But for this, I didn't know anyone personally that did glass blowing, and no one really in my network knew anyone as well. So I knew I basically would have to cold call someone to try to get them to be the subject in this documentary, which was kind of a risk I knew I was gonna have to take because this whole documentary is gonna be based on a single person that I know nothing about and would probably not even meet before we would actually start shooting. So I literally just went into Google and typed in glass blowers near me and messaged about 10 different people. A few people actually messaged me back and showed a bit of interest, but Paul Rodrigue, who ended up being the subject for this video, definitely stood out to me a little bit. Mainly I could tell that he was a bit of a character just from the messages we were sending back and forth and from his social media presence. Also, he sent me another documentary that he was a part of a few years ago, so I knew he had some experience on camera. But another thing that really sealed the deal for me in picking him to be the subject of this documentary was his workspace. A dingy, chaotic looking workshop with a large garage door that would just flood in a ton of natural light, I knew would look great on camera and would actually have to minimize the amount of lighting I would have to do on the day. So the first thing I do when I'm trying to come up with a story for a project I want to create is pull some references. And for this, I pulled some other short documentaries within the same style that I wanted to go for mine. Mainly this one from Danny Gewirtz and Matt Attia. I'll leave them in the link in my bio. They're great, check them out. The next step was I planned out the different segments of how I wanted this story to unfold. So the first 30 seconds, I wanted to feel like almost a movie trailer that really pulls the viewer's attention in. And then the rest of the story would unfold in these chapters. What is our character's story with glass blowing? What makes glass blowing so special? The negative sides of glass blowing and life as an artist. And then what motivates him to keep going. I think it's really important to have an outline of how you want your story to unfold before you shoot your project and even before you start creating your interview questions. When you begin to shoot your project and interview your subject, things will inevitably change from your original plan. However, it's important to try and steer the story in the direction that you want it to be headed towards. Finding the music to match your story. In pre-production, I picked out the music I wanted to use for each section of the doc, and this was a really huge help. Prior to this, when I've worked on documentaries before, I usually always think about the music when I'm in post, but picking out the music beforehand really helped me nail the pacing and the tone that I wanted to go for. So for example, I picked out this song for the intro part of the doc, and I wanted it to really feel like high energy and chaotic, like you're seeing him in his workshop, like sparks are flying, like smoke is going everywhere, and I really think this track helps sell that. And then in the next segment of the doc, where we see Paul at home with his family, I picked a song that was a lot more soft and mellow in order to really slow things down, creating a shot list. So I knew beforehand that filming the glass blowing process was going to be very chaotic, and so we were going to have to be pretty run and gun, and we probably wouldn't be able to stop the glass blowing for certain shots. However, I still did plan for some specialty shots that I knew we could get while working around this. So some of those shots were the high angle shot of the studio where Paul walks over and opens the garage doors, and the shot where it's zooming in where Paul's using the fire torch. These were some of my favorite shots in the project, mainly because the majority of the B-roll obviously was him glass blowing, but I knew I wanted something in the studio space that kind of broke away from this. And since I knew beforehand that the glass blowing process was going to be very chaotic and run and gun, I knew I wanted to have an additional camera in order to maximize coverage. It only took Paul about an hour and a half to make this sculpture, and I knew we'd only have time to do it once. So having another camera operator there really helped. There's no way I would have been able to get some of these off-speed shots without having an additional camera there. Preparing for the interview. So a good tip that I've heard for creating documentaries is starting your day off shooting some B-roll, having your subject do whatever it is they do in order for them to warm up on camera a bit before you go in to shoot like an hour, 2-hour interview. However, for this project, I knew this probably wasn't going to be an option. We had one day to shoot all the glass blowing stuff and the interview, and I knew that Paul was probably gonna get really sweaty doing the glass blowing and would be pretty exhausted after the fact, so I knew that we would have to shoot the interview first. So prior to the shoot date, I made a point to talk to Paul on the phone a couple of times, just so we could actually get a little more familiar with each other and actually hear each other's voices before the shoot day. And I feel like this helped a lot. Things were definitely a lot less awkward than they would have been if we hadn't talked on the phone a bit before this. Inspiration on the day. So in pre-production, this project was only planned to be one shoot day in Paul's studio. However, after we shot the interview and listened to his story, I thought of some B-roll sequences that could really add a lot to this project. In his interview, he compares glass art to the colors of nature and how they reflect in his work. So I thought, what a better way to actually represent what he's talking about than to go out and film it. So a few weeks after the shoot, I went to this conservatory here in Toronto and I filmed this beautiful garden. And then a couple of days after that, I got up early and filmed this beach shot. I really liked how this sequence came together in the end, and I think it really helped represent what Paul is talking about when he's talking about the beauty of glass blowing. The other sequence that I was inspired to shoot was his home life. In his interview, he talks about his daughter and how she's now shown an interest in glass blowing, but how that worries him because it's been such a tough career for him financially. Once I heard this, I knew I had to try and film him with his family in order to have better B-roll to go along with this story. I wanted to just be a fly on the wall and document an average day in his home life. So his daughter and him cooked dinner together and ate as a family. Also, while I was in his home, I decided to film him go through some old photos to coincide with the portion where he talks about his past and growing up. Planning, but being able to adapt. Personally, I think that pre-production is the most important stage in any project. Projects really come alive in pre-production, and having a solid, thorough plan will always help you be more successful on the day. However, especially when it comes to documentary work, you should leave yourself open to new ideas and new paths that your story can take. I had a pretty clear vision for this project when I started it. However, after meeting Paul and hearing his story, I got so inspired and I knew I had to pivot. The sequences I shot later on are some of my favorite parts of this project, and I think they made the story feel a lot more personal. I'm planning on creating a couple more videos down the line breaking down the cinematography and the post-production of this project. So if you're into this kind of stuff, please like, subscribe. It really helps motivate me to keep making these kinds of videos, and I'll see you in the next one.